Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we continue speaking about word order, and in this lesson we'll be dealing with questions. Previously we discussed word order in declarative sentences. You can watch that video following the link in the description. So as you already know, if you have watched that video, in declarative sentences we follow the SVO word order. That means that the subject goes first. The subject is followed by the verb, then goes the object if we have one, and adverbial modifiers. Let's compare declarative sentences with the word order that we have in questions. You will see that the SVO rule is violated in questions. Declarative sentences or statements. Alex is a cloud architect. My sister works in that store. Oak trees won't grow in this soil. We will have done it by Monday. As you see, the first component that we have in each of these sentences is the subject. If the sentence is negative, the subject is followed by an auxiliary verb that contains not, like the third sentence, for example. Oak trees won't, that is, will not grow in this soil. Then goes the notion verb or the main verb, and then go the rest of the words. Now let's look at interrogative sentences or questions. Is Alex a cloud engineer? Does your sister work in that store? Will oak trees grow in this soil? Will they have done it by Monday? As you see, the subject is no more the first component in the sentences. We start with an auxiliary verb. Or if our verb or our notion verb is an anomalous finite, we start with it. In this case, we don't have another verb in the sentence. Here we don't have a notion verb because anomalous finites, like the verb to be, behave in a specific way. They can function both as auxiliary verbs and as notion verbs. I explain it in this video in detail, so if you're interested and if you don't know what anomalous finites are, I think it's a good idea to watch it. Now, in complex tenses like the future perfect tense, for example, like in our last example here, will they have done it by Monday, you have two auxiliary verbs. Then in this case, the first auxiliary goes to the first place, that's will, then goes the subject, and then goes the second auxiliary and the notion verb. Will they have done it by Monday? This way or another, this is not the SVO that we studied in our previous lessons. In questions, in majority of questions in English, auxiliary verbs precede the subjects. Now, what types of questions do we have? There are several types of questions or interrogative sentences in English. In this particular lesson, we'll be speaking about two. Why? Because these two types of questions help us see the structure. The structure is a little bit different for these two cases, but the rest of the types of questions that we have follow either of these two that we are going to discuss today. So what's important for us is to remember that we can divide questions into two main groups: general questions and special questions. General questions are also known as yes or no questions because they ask general questions, and the answer to these questions is obviously yes or no. For example, am I free to go? Is she an engineer? Was he at the library? Aren't they at home now? Will you speak to Michael? These are all general questions, and my answer to each of these questions can be yes or no. For example, am I free to go? Yes, you are. Is she an engineer? No, she isn't. Was he at the library? Yes, he was. And so on and so forth. Now, the second group that we'll be talking about is special questions. Special questions are also known as WH questions because they set a question to a particular part of speech, to a particular word of a sentence. The majority of question words in English start with these two letters, WH. It's what, when, where, why. How is an exception, yeah? So we call them WH questions or special questions. Let's look at some examples. Where are you going? What is her job? Why did he go to the library? When are you going to be there? How would you feel in his shoes? In special questions, the first component is the question word. Now let's look at the formulas. In general questions, the first place is given to the auxiliary verb. The auxiliary verb is followed by the subject, which in its turn is followed by the verb. Then goes the object, if we have one, and the rest of the words, which are verbal modifiers. You already know it, yeah? So basically, we do have the SVO, but it is preceded by an auxiliary verb. For instance, did you go to the party last night? In special questions, two components precede the subject. First goes the question word, then goes the auxiliary verb, then goes the subject, then goes the verb, the object, and the verbal modifier of the sentence. For instance, why did you go to the party last night? When did you go to the party? Where did you go last night? You've probably paid attention to the verb in all of these examples. The verb is the same, it's go. And the structure that we have just learned will be true for all the verbs except anomalous finites. There are 24 anomalous finites in English. Again, this is the video that tells you about it. So let's compare the word order in questions that contain words like go, write, do, and those that have anomalous finites. Classical word order in questions. General question: does she write novels? Auxiliary verb, subject, verb, object. Special question: how does she write them? Question word, auxiliary verb, subject, verb, object. Word order of a question with anomalous finites. General question: is she a good journalist? Auxiliary verb, subject, object. And special question: what is your favorite color? Question word, auxiliary verb, subject. I say auxiliary verb in the last two cases to stress the difference in these structures, yeah, to stress the difference between general questions that have both an auxiliary and a notion verb and these questions. Because anomalous finites, in this case the verb to be, can function both as an auxiliary verb and as a notion verb, but we don't write it two times. Yeah, we don't use it two times in one question. We don't say, is she be a good journalist? We just say, is she a good journalist? And that's enough. So we only have one verb, and that is the place of the auxiliary verb in a typical question. So we don't have another verb in the question, yeah? Look at the structures, compare them, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now let's compare both declarative sentences and interrogative sentences with the verb to be and with other verbs in present and in past. In present, he works at a power plant. He doesn't work at a power plant. Does he work at a power plant? Yes, he does. Work is the main verb and does is an auxiliary verb. He is an engineer. He isn't an engineer. Is he an engineer? Yes, he is. Is both the main and the auxiliary verb, the present form of to be for the third person singular. In past, she came to the party. She didn't come to the party. And did she come to the party? Yes, she did. Come is the main verb and did is an auxiliary verb. Now the verb to be. She was at the party. She wasn't at the party. Was she at the party? Yes, she was. Was is both the main and the auxiliary verb, the past form of to be for the third person singular. When you juxtapose those structures, you'll see that they are very different. And this is what you have to master at the very beginning of your journey learning English, because you used to be in very simple sentences. Basically to say who you are, what your name is, or to put similar questions to somebody else, you need to know this formulas. You need to know how to use the verb to be in statements and questions, and they are very different from those formulas that we have with other verbs in statements and questions. Look please at these boxes and memorize them. Here we have anomalous finite to be in present and in past for the first, the second, and the third person singular and plural. These forms are to be learned by heart, drilled, because without knowing them, you won't be able to speak. Now, an untypical word order can be seen in a separate subtype of special questions, which is questions to the subject. Let's look at this statement. Anne bought a jacket. Subject, verb, object. The SVO word order, that's clear. How do we put a question to the subject? We just drop the subject and put a question word, who or what, instead of it. Very simple. So, did Anne buy a jacket? Yes, she did. It's a general question. Why did Anne buy a jacket? It's a question to the object. And who bought a jacket? Anne. This is a question to the subject. Both the question to the object and the question to the subject are special questions. But the structure of the question to the subject is different from the rest of special questions. Questions to the subject can start with the following words. Who? Who told you this? Jane did. What? What was that? Some noise from the street. Which one? There are 2 phones on the table. Which one is yours? The red one. By the way, I have a short video on the difference between ones and one, and it's plural for ones. If you feel that you might be interested in it, please follow the link in the description. Which of plus a noun. Which of your dogs is the smallest? Fluffy. Fluffy is the smallest. How many plus a countable noun? How many guests left the party? 20 people. How much plus an uncountable noun? How much time has passed? 20 minutes. So you see that questions to the subject start not only with who and what, but actually with many question words or phrases that can replace a noun. In these questions, the auxiliary verb is dropped and is replaced with a question word or a phrase. And thus the word order in such questions becomes more similar to the word order in declarative sentences or statements. Compare. In other special questions, there is the auxiliary verb that follows the question word and then the subject. In special questions, we don't have neither the auxiliary verb nor the subject, because the subject is something that we are asking our question about. So it's missing. And instead of the subject, we have a question word. So basically, if you look at the structure, you see the SVO. But instead of the subject, you have a question word that replaces it. Let's look at some more examples of different types of questions. Do they speak Spanish? It's a general question in the present simple tense. They is the third person plural, so we use do as an auxiliary verb. Do they speak Spanish? Does she do any sports? The same, it's the present simple tense and it's a general question, but we use does as the auxiliary verb here because she is the third person singular. Pay attention that the word do is actually used 2 times here. It's the main verb, do, and the auxiliary verb, does.
Does she do any sports? Don't you like ice cream? I can't believe it. This is a negative general question in the present simple tense. Don't you like ice cream means that I'm surprised that you don't like it. Do you really don't like ice cream? How come you don't like ice cream? Yada yada. Negative questions and positive questions are not interchangeable in English. If you ask a negative question like this one, don't you like ice cream? You express your surprise or frustration. If you ask, do you like? In a positive form, you just demonstrate your interest in somebody's preferences. Did you have enough time to finish your article yesterday? It's the past simple tense and the question is general. Did is the auxiliary verb, have is the main verb. Did you have? Pay attention that we don't ask have you or had you enough time. It's incorrect. We need the auxiliary verb did here. It's a must. Didn't Alex go to the gym yesterday? I guess I saw him there. Another negative question, but in the past simple tense this time. This question expresses your surprise because you thought that you saw him. Will they allow us to smoke inside if we rent the whole place? It's a general question in the future simple tense. Actually, it's the first conditional. Right? Will they allow us to smoke inside if we rent the whole place on condition that we rent? What has happened to my swimming suit? It's a special question, in particular a question to the subject in the present perfect tense. Let's try to answer this question. What has happened to my swimming suit? Nothing has happened to your swimming suit. What replaces the subject in this question? Why are you making these strange noises? The present progressive tense, and it's a special question. Where would we be now if it hadn't been for your uncle's help? This is a special question in the subjunctive mood. Check my video on the subjunctive mood if you are not sure how this question was formed. Now, who can help me prune these apple trees? It's a special question, in particular a question to the subject in the present simple tense. How many people live in Albania? Again, it's a special question, a question to the subject in the present simple tense. May I ask you another question? It's a general question in the present simple tense. Pay attention that this question contains a modal verb or an anomalous finite. Because all modal verbs are anomalous finites. They behave in a specific way. They take the first place in general questions. May I ask you another question?
That's all I have to say about questions in English. There will be a separate video on this channel about types of questions. Because as I said, we were interested today in learning the structure. That's why we spoke about these two formulas of a general question and special question. Of course, there are more types of questions in English, but all of them, this way or another, follow one of these formulas. I will make another lesson on questions, which will be more about purposes of those questions and their semantic aspects rather than the word order. Subscribe to this channel if you don't want to miss it, leave your comments down below, and see you in the next lesson.